Bapin, am I audible?
Hossain, you should start.
Yes, yes,
It's
yes.
audible.
So, yes, thank you very much. So, good evening, everyone. So, this is the second day of our 3-day virtual conference on belonging and homelessness. So, today we have first technical session, and this session will be chaired by Dr. Shoaib Ekram. Now, I would request Bapin Mollik, who is an assistant professor of Department of English, Dr. B.R. Ambedkar College, to introduce our today's chair. So, Bapin, over to you.
Yes, thank you. Thank you so much, Hassan. This is Bapin Mollik. I'm an assistant professor as well as head, Department of English, Dr. B.R. Ambedkar College, which is affiliated to University of Kalyani. And on behalf of BASE, Bengali Academy for Social Empowerment, Gaur Mahavidyalaya, which is affiliated to University of Gaur Bongo, Ambedkar Center for Cultural Studies, and the Department of English, Dr. B. Ambedkar College. I'd like to welcome you all to this uh, second day and session one. And the title of the webinar, conference, that is belongingness and homelessness. And session one, uh, uh, Dr. Shoaib Akram, he will chair the session. Dr. Shoaib Akram has been working as an assistant professor in the Department of English at Rabindranath University, Kolkata, since 2016. And prior to this, he was teaching at the English and Foreign Languages University, Hyderabad. He has done his master's and doctorate in English from English and Foreign Languages University, Hyderabad. And his area of interest includes critical linguistics, Indian English literature, cultural studies, and theory. And he has presented many papers in national and international conferences and has many publications in various journals. So without any further delay, I'd like to hand over this virtual space to Dr. Akram, Dr. Shoaib Akram, sir. So what to you, sir?
Thank you. Yes, thank you. A warm welcome to all participants and listeners to this 3-day virtual conference on belonging and homelessness. We have a total of 7 presenters who would be presenting their work in this particular session. I would just read out the names. It's just a short, kind of a roll call, probably to make sure you get to know your, turns and how you would be presenting. So we would be starting with Anwar Hossain, followed by Durdana Jahan, then Ekta Bawa, Shaunak Das, Mohammad Naimuddin Mola, and in the end we would have Mrs. Shukita. I hope all of you are there. So without any further delay, we would be starting with the first presentation from Anwar Hossain. He is an assistant professor of English, Nagar College, affiliated to University of Kalyani. And his title of the paper is Quest for a Homeland in Rabindranath, Gora. Yes, over to you, Anwar.
Thank you, sir. And good afternoon, everyone. As Sarah already introduced, the title of my paper is Quest for a Homeland in Rabindranath's Gora. So, if nationalism is a dichotomy, is a dichotomy of inherent love for everything that belongs to the self and a naked hatred for anything that belongs to the other, this polarity of the self and other is also thrust in the mind of the people within the boundary of a nation, as was found in Nazi Germany. Therefore, there is a feeling of homelessness or alienation whenever this parochial politics of national identity comes to the forefront. Rabindranath envisioned a home and a world which is not partitioned by narrow domestic worlds, within quote. Rabindranath, who had immense love for humanity, could not therefore confine himself within the politics of nationalism, which gives birth to mindless chauvinism and xenophobia and serve as a justification for organized violence and tyranny. This is a quote from Partha Chatterjee. In Gora, Rabindranath was in search of a homeland beyond the sectarian politics of nationalism, a land where the ideals of humanity would reign supreme and there won't be conflicts in the name of religion, race, caste, or food habits. The focus of this paper is on this quest for a homeland where an individual choice is respected. This is delineated here by tracing Gora's change in worldview as he came across multiple characters and experiences in his life. In Gora, Rabindranath plays with the problematics of identity by creating a protagonist who is born of an English lady but brought up by a Hindu mother from an Orthodox family. In terms of race and nationality, he is a white European by birth but has lived the life of an Indian Hindu. Thus, in the character of Gora, Tagore depicts an ironical situation of a white man cultivating the unbounded love for Hindu religion and nation. And thus, he seems to say that religion and patriotism are not ingrained in the blood of a man from birth, but are contracted by him from his surroundings and environments. Indeed, towards the beginning of the novel, one comes to know about Gora's militant antagonism to everything English. The narrative voice makes one conscious that Gora would, in fact, be only too delighted if he got a chance in the street of quarreling with an Englishman. Gora was also antagonistic towards the Brahmin Pandits, but he had great respect for Vidya Bagish, with whom he began to study Vedanta philosophy when a controversy started in the papers by some English missionary in which he attacked Hindu religion and Hindu society and invited discussion. Gora was fired up at once and even wrote a book in English on Hinduism. He came to the realization, I quote, "We must save our country and ourselves from insult by manfully bearing the burdens of our motherland with all our strength and all our pride." Unquote. With these ideas, Gora turned out to be a strict Hindu and began religiously to bathe in the Ganges regularly, to perform ceremonial worship morning and evening, to take particular care of what he touched and what he ate, and even grow a tiki. With this orthodox attitude, Gora insisted that it is impossible to take food in his mother's womb so long as she keeps on the Christian maidservant Lakshmi. He did not even allow his friend Binoy to take food, saying, I quote, "He is the son of a Brahmin. It won't do to make him forget his responsibilities for the sake of a few sweetmeats." Unquote. In the name of society, Gora had forbidden Binoy to eat with his mother Anandamoyi. But the question arises whether she would bear such a thing and whether Binoy would tolerate it. The narrative voice makes one conscious that Binoy was largely guided by the heart. At every step, Binoy obeying the prohibitions of the partisan India. Sorry. He was sometimes beset with doubts, yet he obeyed. Now a spirit of rebelliousness showed itself within him, as this India today seemed merely negation incarnate. He came out of the prejudices and even took a glass of water from the Christian maid servant Lakshmi's hand. In this way, to quote Harish Raizada, Tagore had directed his fight of humanism against fanatic religion as well as narrow-minded patriotism simultaneously. Unquote. Tagore had also raised the voice of resistance against narrow-minded sectarianism through the character of Anandamoyi. Nothing from what she considered right. When people say, God knows, it is no accusation to Gora in her arms that she bade farewell to convention. With Gora in her arms, she dared to cut herself away from tradition and custom. She said, I quote, when you hold a child to your breast, then you feel certain that no one is born in this world with caste. From the very day, the understanding came to me that if I look down upon anyone for being a low caste or a Christian, then God would snatch you away from me. Only stay in my arms as a light of my home. I prayed, and I will accept water from the hands of anyone in the world. Unquote. What Anandamoyi embraced is humanity, following simply her own nature and crossing the boundaries of caste, class, religion, and nationalism. Gora's concept of India is severely shaken by his experience in rural Bengal and particularly from his encounter with the resistance offered by that predominantly Muslim village. In Ghosh, Gora not only encountered the oppression of the indigo planters, but also came to know of the torture of the then collector Madhav Chatterjee, who was cruel and yet soft-spoken. Gora was particularly moved by the fact that the barber and his wife, breaking the conservative conventions, had adopted a Mohammedan boy as his father was in jail for resisting the planters. When the barber's wife saw Farou's son Tamiz, who used to call her auntie, starving, she took him away to her own home. This might seem an unhindu conduct, but to the simple barber, there is no difference between Hari and Allah. Gora also realized that there is a terrible wrong in making the sense of purity an external thing. He was too hungry and thirsty, but the very idea of having to preserve his caste by eating in the house of that unscrupulous scoundrel, Madhav Chatterjee, became more and more unbearable the longer he thought of it. His mind revolted against it, and his conscience asked, I quote, shall my caste remain pure by eating from the hands of this oppressor of the poor Mohammedans and be lost in the home of the man who has not only shared their miseries but given shelter to one of them at the risk of being outcasted himself? Unquote. This is the voice of conscience wishing to cross all the barriers. In Gora, we have also Paresh Babu, who says that in our country there is an intolerable aversion of man for man, and this is dividing and subdividing our people. He finds that not only on the intellectual level we have achieved impartial vision, sorry, that only on the intellectual level we have achieved impartial vision, but this is merely an abstraction and does not include the feelings of the heart. If Binoy was in the habit of taking meals in the Brahmo house, Anandamoy also seemed to have no scruples about her caste. This might astonize Hari Mohini, and she might not be at all pleased. But this, according to Tagore, might bridge the gulf of difference between individuals. Though Anandamoy's husband, Krishnadal Babu, was a strict Hindu, and he would eat nothing not cooked by his own hands, she broke all the barriers of differences of caste, class, and religion. She explained, I quote, Sister, so long as society seemed to me the most important thing in the world, I used to respect its rules. But one day, God revealed himself to me in such a way that he would not allow me to regard society anymore. Since he himself took away my caste, I have ceased to fear what others think of me. Sectarianism, said Paresh Babu, is a thing which makes people entirely forget the simple and obvious truth that man is man. It creates a kind of whirlpool in which the society made distinctions between Hindu and Brahmo assumes greater importance than universal truth.
Yes, Anwar, please wind up. We are running.
Okay,
Please
okay
wind
sir. The penance ceremony, which was to take place to cleanse Gora, not only from the pollutions of his jail life, but to make him pure from every point of view, turned out to be the turning point of his self-discovery. The title of The Light of the Hindu Religion would also be bestowed upon Gora. But the irony is that Gora was not the son of a Brahmin, and therefore, according to the strict laws of the Hindu society, he had got no right to penance. It was during the mutiny that one night Gora's mother, in fear of the sepoys, took refuge in Krishnadal Babu's house, and Gora's father was an Irishman who had been killed the previous day during the fighting. Gora's, Gora's mother died that night after giving birth to Gora. When Gora came to know all about this, everything changed in his life and his relation to the world around him. It was at this uncanny situation when the family world suddenly became unfamiliar that Gora came to the realization of his true identity. While on the one hand, he now finds a feeling of kinship with the English doctor, on the other hand, there remains no more any obstacle in his way of realizing India with his whole life. In the whole country, the doors of all temples might be closed against Gora, and there might be no more any seat for him in any Hindu fest. But at the same time, he need no longer fear being contaminated or becoming an outcast, and he shall not now have to look on the ground at every step to preserve his purity. What Gora realized at the end is all inclusive plurality of India. In Anandamoy, Gora finds the true mother, as pointed out by Ashish Nandi. The new awareness of its origins saves Gora from his narrow nationalism and brings him closer to his mother and by implication motherland. In it, Anandamoy is the embodiment of the homeland India, which is all inclusive and gives shelter to people belonging to different castes, creed, religion, and nationality. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Thank you. Okay, for the other participants, please keep in mind that the presentation is supposed to be of around 8 minutes, after which I will be giving you a reminder. Please, please pace your presentations according and within the time. Okay, so 8 minutes, otherwise we will be running short of any questions. We will not be able to take up any questions in the later part of the presentations. Okay, so 8 minutes is the time. After that, I will be giving you a gentle reminder. Okay, next we have Durdana Jahan. It's a joint presentation by Durdana Jahan, a research scholar, and Dr. Shaifali Arora, Assistant Professor, Department of English, Lovely Professional University, Punjab. The title of the paper is Reading Dimple as a Typecasted Trans Woman Character in Jeet Thayil's Narcopolis. Yes. Uh, who would be presenting this paper?
Good evening, sir.
Right, yes. Please switch on the camera because the session is being recorded. So if the camera is not on, it becomes very difficult to, kind of get an idea as to who is presenting the paper. The authenticity needs to be established. Okay, please.
Sure, sir, sure. Good evening, everyone. First of all, I would like to thank the BASE conference and the organizers for holding this virtual conference. Due to some unavoidable circumstances, Dr. Shaifali Arora, who is my supervisor as well, couldn't be here to join the conference. So I'll be reading the paper on my own. My name is Durdana Jahan, and I'm a research scholar at Department of English, Lovely Professional University. And the title of my paper is Reading Dimple as a Typecasted Trans Woman Character in Jeet Thayil's Narcopolis. The research paper tries to study the formulaic typecasting of the trans woman Dimple in a role that has been appropriated by the writers in general, hence proving deteriorating for the development of the character of a trans woman in the novel Narcopolis, and explores how much of her character traits are not explored in order to truly understand the character. The novel is written in the year 2012 and the story dates back to 1970s. The writer has tried to make the character relatable to that era, but as the novel is written for Generation Z, it could have experimented with the character of the trans women. Keeping in view the latest developments of the rights of the LGBTQIA+ community and their efforts trying to erase the stereotypes held against them, particularly against a trans woman who is a part of the LGBTQIA+ community. The character of Dimple could have been progressive in order to present an original picture to the world about them. She's an integral part of the story, without which most of the action would not have taken place in the novel. The character of trans women is still stereotyped in a conventional frame, which is being investigated in the paper. Narcopolis is a story about Mumbai, the inexorable change of the city, the rise and fall of the drug dens, the khanas, the onset of new drugs like heroin, brown sugar, gharad, etc., and about the characters who are rooting for some affinity and companionship to each other through opium. This novel tries to provide the glimpse of 30 years of history from which all the stories come together to make the plot of the novel, and also tries to give us a glimpse of a trans person's life, which has an important role in the novel. In the novel, we meet Dimple, the trans woman who works at the drug den, Khana of Rashid, during the day, making pialis of opium for the customers, becomes Rashid's sex partner for most of the days, and also works at a brothel in the night, where she also stays in one of the rooms as she has no place to call as home. She too becomes an addict, which becomes one of the reasons of her untimely death. The LGBTQIA+ community is the umbrella term with which people who are lesbians, gays, bisexual, trans, queer, intersex, asexual are more and more associate themselves with. This community not only supports its people to tackle with different issues, but also spreads positivity among people who are afraid of realizing their true gender and sexual orientation. A trans woman is the female who was assigned male at birth, but once they realize their identity, they lead on their lives to become what their identity offers to them. Dimple is portrayed as an conventional character of a trans woman, ill fated, forced into the world of drugs and prostitution. We don't see the development of the character emotionally, physically, or economically. Her character is still shackled in the unchangeable character traits of the Hijras, and she is seen to get hurt by the things said to her by others, making it again an example of a classic trans woman, instead of portraying her into a strong character who accepts her identity as a trans woman. Upon reading the novel to the end, we come to the realization that we are not provided with a better end for the trans women. Her role switching, becoming the mistress of Rashid, further pushes her backwards, adding more suffering to her already perturbed life. Only her name changes from Dimple to Zenith, but her fate remains unchanged. In the end of the novel, we see how many things have changed and developed for the characters, as well as the city and the Khana. But it is the character of Dimple that remains unchanged, and she dies without understanding the meaning of a free life. In the novel Narcopolis, the character of Dimple, the trans woman, which offers nothing new, as is expected from the writer, writing the novel in the time where the LGBTQIA plus community has moved far ahead of the stereotyping and wants the world to accept them in all fields of life, instead of pushing the walls on them or bearing down on them by oppressing them and forcing them into prostitution and other odd jobs in order to make a living. If the novel is read from a trans woman's perspective, one can imagine how difficult and traumatizing it might be for them to again go through the age old conventional stereotyping of them by always typecasting or portraying their characters as prostitutes or people who don't fit, hence, snatching one more chance from them, from people to think of them in a better way. There was a possibility of creating a magic from Dimple's character, but the writer has kept it raw, taking it from the street as it is and not letting her grow. Further typecasting her in a role written for hundreds of them ever since their stories began to come in writing. And as the novel finishes, we see that the writer has not done any justice to her character, putting her in a stereotypical role. The writer hasn't even left her with the sense of one identity in order to understand what she truly wanted and how she wanted to live. Here we should understand that appropriating the stereotype for a generation like this is never a good idea. When people, particularly the LGBTQIA plus community, have and are already working hard trying to erase all the stereotypes about a particular set of humans called trans women. Thank you very much. It was a summary of my paper because I couldn't present the whole of 3,000 words of the paper. So I preferred to present the capsule summary of my paper. I hope it made it clear about the title of my topic, and I hope it made my point clear about what I was about, going to discuss in my paper. Thank you very
Right,
much for having me. Thank you for holding this conference.
right. Thank you. Thank you, Durdana. Thank you. Okay, next we have Ekta Bawa, PhD scholar, and it's also a joint paper, and Dr. Shaifali Arora, Assistant Professor, Department of English, Lovely Professional University. And the title of the paper is An Ecological Sailing Towards Amitav Ghosh's Ibis Trilogy, a Historical Perspective. Do we have Ekta Bawa here? Or Dr. Shaifali Arora? Right, okay. So, um, We don't have Ekta. Okay, so since Ekta Bawa is not here, nor is Dr. Shaifali Arora, we would be moving ahead with the next participant. And if they join in, we can have the paper later on in the session. So we have next is Shaunak Das, UGC Senior Research Fellow, Department of Comparative Literature, Jadavpur University. And the title of the paper is Departures from Subjectivity, Figurations in Proust and Moshel. Do we have Shaunak Das?
Yeah, sir. Good
Yes.
evening.
Good evening. Yes, over to you, Shaunak.
Sir, with your permission, may I also present the paper on screen while I read it?
Yeah, sure, sure.
Just a second.
I hope the sharing screen option is available to you. Is it?
Yes, sir, it is. Okay, so good evening to all present. Um, I begin my paper with the contention that for a long time onwards in Western thought, the self was considered to be the home of human existence. Human existence came to be conceptualized and understood in terms of self and subjectivity. And it is from the phenomenological turn onwards, I mean, from Husserl, I would say, that human existence comes to be considered as something beyond what the notion of self had offered us. And parallelly, I would like to look at this embodiment in the architectonic of the Proustian universe, although I had planned to talk about both Proust and Musil, but I have stuck to only Proust, considering the length of the paper and the diversity of my arguments. So without further ado, I would like to begin. Now, Hannah Arendt begins her book, The Human Condition, with a simple yet profound musing that human existence is a conditioned one. If indeed so, what is human existence conditioned by? Now, if you look at the word for conditioned in German, which is bedingt, it has the clue already inside it, because bedingt comes from the word ding, which means thing. Now, also echoed by others like Wittgenstein, a thingly existence among things is the governing condition which co-figures all that takes place, be it in the physical sense or also in the abstract sense. Because if you look at the other definition of thing in the German language, which is Gegenstand, then we can see that thoughts as well as feelings could also be considered as Gegenstände. And finally, I quote here from Arvidas Leogeris, who says, just to substantiate my point, the horizon of ours, of humans as finite beings, is thingly. Thus, man, as a being thrown into a finite horizon, always and everywhere is thingly and is sensibly conditioned. Man cannot escape things. As human beings, we are always in confrontation with things. We are prone to the habit of often categorizing things as belonging to either nature or of our own making. In attempting such categorization, we fall back upon the same anthropomorphic worldview that places the human subject at the center of the world and explicates all phenomena with relation to this organic center. Such a constructivist worldview had begun with Kant's falling back on the Copernican revolution, implying every experience to be a product determined by perspective, which is the classic case of constructivism, and gradually gave rise to an epistemology where every occurrence had to pass through the filter of human perception, conceding in the process any claim to autonomy or a beyond human alterity. The world is thus what it appears to me, and hence a subjective phenomenon conceptualized in my subjectivity, or that appears to many like me, where experiences come to be understood in an intersubjective field. This not only reifies the thingness of the thing to the limits of human subjectivity, but at the same time delimits the condition of being in the world within the scaffolds of a self that remains identical to itself throughout. However, the thing's thingness lies in the fact that it cannot be rendered as a subjective representation like the one fulfilled by an object. The thing doesn't give itself over as an object of knowledge, that can be exhaustively defined. And thus the human being as a thing among things too loses its foothold over superficially institutionalized and somewhat calcified humanism. Modernism, in effecting the shift from Kantian disinterest to Heideggerian interesse, where the human being loses its immanent subjectivity, resulting, to quote from Levinas, an exteriority of the inward, plays out the transition from an epistemology-driven worldview towards an ontological inquiry. This is the turn I was talking about, the phenomenological turn, which is also often called as the ontological turn, a journey that was necessary to affirm and appreciate the thing for what it is by and in itself. Now I come to Heidegger, his essay, The Origin of the Work of Art, where he talks about the etymology of the thing as it is derived from the Greek hupokaimenon, where it was understood as essentially a happening, a gathering whose event itself created the code. Now, according to this understanding, the thing does not possess any immanence or center, for its code is basically nothing by itself other than the event which happens around it. But in Latin, if we look at the reception of this thought, where it is already known as subjectum, this is, in Heidegger's view, the point at which the very rootlessness of Western thought begins. Because the thing, once conceptualized as event, now is regarded as a bearer of properties, which in fact becomes the dominant meaning of the self in the course of time, basically a receptacle of properties, experiences, and so on. This proclivity for viewing the thing as a subject containing definite features prefigures, in a sense, a culture of subject-object duality that would be heralded by Descartes' formulation of reason as the ground for human existence. Since the subject in Descartes is conceived purely as a thinking substance, cogitating everything that it is not, the very substantiality of the subject is taken for granted and not questioned. Likewise, in Hume's empiricism, the subject is merely a receptacle of sensual impressions, where the very nature of the receptacle is passed over in favor of what it comes to accumulate. Heidegger's attempt to understand the thingness of the work of art along rational and empiricist dimensions reveal their inadequacy in addressing the problem at hand. The literary work does not agree to an exhaustive definition whereby a set of countable properties are applied to it. We can understand this very easily from the fact that scores and hundreds of books have been written on classics, and yet it is inexhaustible. And the rational outlook fails, for there is no concept to be discovered in art. I mean, there is no conceptuality as to be found in literary works. Likewise, our experience of art cannot be encapsulated by sensual experience alone, for it involves affect and understanding, a translation of material forms to responses as varied as ranging from empathy to disgust. So Heidegger says the rational method places the work too far in trying to conceptualize it in the form of concept, in logos, and the empiricist outlook brings it to close, disregarding the intellection that is involved in the process. So can the thingness then be understood as the work being formed matter? This is the third thesis of Heidegger, which he also refutes on the ground of equipmentality, because formed matter is something which is designed as per the function it is supposed to fulfill. In literature, it is not possible to determine this function from either end of the spectrum, I mean from the author's end as well as the reader's end. I am passing over this paragraph so that I can come to my discussion on Proust quicker, because the stipulated time is not as much as I had expected. So here I draw this conclusion from Heidegger, that the thing cannot be approached by rational, sensual and pragmatic attitudes, because each of these dispositions is a manifestation of a belief and certitude of the human self. And the untranslatability of the literary work is not a given fact, but acquires valency only in relation to a self that confuses being with knowledge. The thing in its thingness does not give itself over to be translated into subjective knowledge, whereby the self can seek to maintain its undisputed centrality. Basically, we are making the contention that the sense of self does not stick in literary experience because I mean, the selfhood cannot acquire the centrality it seeks to acquire, because there is literary, the literary work always appears emphatically in its otherness. It is from this point of view that Nietzsche, one of the greatest advocates of becoming over being, bitterly remarks of self-preservation being the marvelous economy of the conservation of the human species. This he mentions in Gay Science. To preserve the self is to acquire the modes in which it is compartmentalized and defined. This implies a shutting off of other possibilities and a poverty of the variety of relationships that can constitute human existence. What distinguishes the human from other creatures is precisely the instability of the self. A tiger or a caterpillar does not have to become one, they are born into their species being, and the acquisition of natural functions suffice. However, to be human is something that can never be defined as such. One could only attempt to become human prior definition or goal set upon the path. Now I come to the aesthetic part. The proclivity for the self and individualism gains an impetus in the wake of industrial life. Romantic imagination seeks to salvage a space that it could regard as exclusively its own. More often than not, this exclusivity is based on choices that are all pre-given in an established nexus, like turning away from the monotony of everyday life or regarding art as a spiritual domain which could possibly redeem man. These generalizations hardly offer any ground for the projection of one's being in the world, Dasein's Entwurf, nor do they contribute to the making of any real individuality, for such trends are devoid of the characteristic of responsibility that must accompany every act of freedom. And I quote here from Zimmel, who says that the burden of, modern man is to escape the burden of historical heritage, to seek an individuality of his or her own. However, the question is whether a simple negation itself becomes conventionalized in the process, so that escape becomes synonymous with a new sort of complicity. And here I quote from Adorno, Dialectic of Enlightenment, who speaks about this fake individuality as merely a condition of being able to choose from a variety of options given to us from elsewhere. So pseudo-individuality is a precondition for apprehending and detoxifying tragedy only because individuals are none but mere intersections of universal tendencies. Is it possible to reabsorb them smoothly into the universe? Mass culture thereby reveals the fictitious quality which has characterized the individual throughout the bourgeois era and is wrong only in priding itself on this murky harmony between the universal and particular. So the principle of individuality was contradictory from the very outset. No individuation was really achieved. Mere species being was what to be found. Now, both romanticism and realism culminates into a gala celebration of the self. Romanticism invests significance in the self's capacity to collect experience and mark off an autonomous existential domain, so that, for example, we find in Goethe the word aliveness reaching a huge proportion, which means basically to be alive when something is happening, being a mere receptacle of events. The romantic work of art is seen as being infused with a particular distinct temperament which renders it a closed structure of immanence. The realist work, although it is apparently situated on the other extreme with its claim of objectivity, is as much dependent on the sense of the self, which makes itself visible in the metaphors which realism chooses in its aesthetic temperament, like the bird's eye view, omniscience, and everything, which basically hints at possessing knowledge. Also, given the fact that realism has as its dominant standard the newspaper, which also prides itself for knowing things which a person sitting at home might not know. The modernist novel evinces the sensibility of homelessness in not able to abide by the claims of the self, distrusting subjectivity to be yet another modulated ploy of a consumeristic society that renders possibilities of being human null by providing a fake sense of individuality. The modernist aesthetic, or rather the lack of a well-defined aesthetic, based on selfhood, becomes empathetic to the thingness of the work and the world. Both the work and the world are allowed to stand on their own without the human self located at the center. Such a paradigmatic shift has a twofold consequence. On one hand, there is a depravity at work, or conventional senses of time, space, and morality are now redundant. But on the other hand, the dismissal of the regulative principle of the self ensures a maximalization of becoming. Substitution of self with becoming other, to quote from Gerald Bruns, is a phenomenon of anarchic liberation. Seeing have long since been associated with representation, at the heart of which sits a human subject. We shall now try to see how this functions in Proust's à la recherche du temps perdu, and also notice how the event unpacks the notion of the self. Now, seeing in the technical sense is associated with photography, which we know had a relation to plain realism, photographic realism, and Proust involves a lot of these imports from the world of technology, but these imports are critical and oblique, so to speak. I mean, they are not really direct. So if you look at the vocabulary of the recherche, where we find such words like milieu, propage, refraction, image, photography, radiography, tire, instantané, cliché, and so on, then these are all words which come from the world of photography. But these are not really employed when the theme of narration pertains to photography, but appears as verbs in completely different contexts. Proust internalizes or couches these technical terms as metaphors and uses them as different figures of speech accordingly. Unlike realism, that espouses the modality of the photograph as its standard, Proust's use of technology is narratorial. A photograph engages our sense of space, whereas a novel, and especially Proust's novel, is fundamentally based on the modality of temporal perception. If Proust harnesses time out of metaphors by blending them in contiguity of the narrative, the meaning of photographic moments too must be based on time and not the space it envelops in the frame. The photograph of Marcel with his grandma taken at Baalbek acquires signification not on the basis on what it is, but what it turns out to be in the changing constellation of facts and their interpretation in the course of time. At the time when the photograph was taken, Marcel had thought his grandmother to be a humbug, middle-class woman who puts on too much makeup despite her age when she finds a rare opportunity to be clicked. It is only much later that Marcel learns that his grandmother had been terribly ill at that time and had wanted him not to be agitated due to her sickness, hence the disguise. Even later on, Marcel comes to know Saint-Loup's homosexual affair with the photographer, which adds a new layer of meaning to the photograph. Proust compares the past of most men to be like a photographic dark room encumbered with innumerable negatives which remain useless because the intellect has not developed them. The past in Proust is thus not a repository of completed self, but always changing with time, and photographs, both as objects and in the aforementioned analogy, serve not as a fixed archival source of information, visual information, but an ever-guiding mechanism of meaning generation. Now, if you look at Freud's contemporary photochemist, Joseph Marie Eder, who referred to photographs as latent and builder or latent images, photographs become visible and mature only with their clarity in time, and Proust extracts this technological phenomenon to critique an uncritical faith on what one sees in outside reality and in photographs. Proustian seeing is temporal because significance is not symptomatic with appearances, but must evolve in relation to a development.
Shonak, please wind up if get to the crux of the paper if possible, because the time has been.
Sure. We become aware and conscious of ourselves only so far as we introspect the fragments of ourselves scattered in the past through the perspectives offered by a present situation. Since there is a paucity of time, I shall skip over. Here we find there's a critique on actual seeing as understanding. I'm skipping this part. And another thing which I would like to mention in conjunction with what I've already spoken is that Proustian introspection is not spatial or microscopic. He doesn't try to see inside, but rather it is stretched, it's temporal, telescopic. It is based on distension rather than dissection. So it is again in contradistinction to the aesthetic of the psychological novel, for example, or even some of naturalist fiction which tries to see inside. Um, and also this aspect that a certain image gathers its significance only temporarily, which to quote from Gerard Genet, functions as a foci of aesthetic irradiation. And finally, this point I would like to mention in passing that both the cinematographic and the montage principles of representation don't find much valency in Proust because he is looking at something called a stereoscopic vision, which is a combination of both cinematographic as well as montage formation, which again absolves the self, absolves a single perspective from sitting at the center, and is therefore instrumental in creating certain fractals of vision, so that different things are available from different perspectives, and there is no single self that we can attribute as its experience as one that experiences that. Then there is also this Proustian relationship with Etienne Jules Marie, who again understood photographs as photographs in time, and the use of the art form of frieze, for example, in Proust, also attests to his sensibility of regarding time as the essence of vision and not spatial representations. Then there are other, accentuations which I have used from the text, which since time is short, I am passing over. And last point which I would like to touch on is this idea of spatial form. Joseph Frank writes this book, The Idea of Spatial Form, where he says that modernist novels are basically involved in freezing time to stand still, which is a debatable standpoint because, in my opinion, the modernist novel is rather playing with time instead of freezing time, which in fact could be attributed to the romantic aesthetic, for example, which tries to transcend and therefore is set in an antagonistic relationship with any kind of evanescence of time. And finally, this point with which I am winding up. So, if there is no self which could be discerned as the sole arbitrator of experience, then what kind of an implication does that have for human existence? So, this is from the French philosopher Jean-Luc Nancy, who says that the human being is anything but a limit. I mean, the human being is not a fixed center, but it is always advancing towards a limit which co-forms it. So to be human cannot be equated with being a subject, which as etymologically and experientially explained is a mere receptacle. Homelessness is an internal condition of man, and as Proust shows, it is not a negative condition, but a constitutive condition for being. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Shana. We move to the next presentation. Mohammad Naimuddin Mullah, an independent scholar, University of Burdwan, probably associated with University of Burdwan, and his title of the paper is Metaphor of Insanity, Mantos Toba Tek Singh. Yes, Mohammad Naimuddin.
Thank you, sir. Yes, sir. Am I audible, sir?
Yes, Naimuddin, I would request you to switch on the camera. Yes. Perfect. Yes, please. Over to you.
Okay, sir. Good evening, everyone. And first of all, I would like to thank Base for providing me this wonderful opportunity and for arranging this wonderful virtual seminar. And I'm MD Naimuddin Mullah. I'm an independent scholar. And now I would like to present my paper. And the title of my paper is The Metaphor of Insanity, Mantos Tobatok Singh. Sir, with your permission, I would like to read my paper. Thank you, sir. To begin with, I should say the incredible suffering of the partition, the most unprecedented and barbaric phenomena in the history of subcontinent, with painful and insoluble results, has become a fantastic topic to the Indian, Pakistani, and Sikh writers. Millions of people had to desert their houses, ancestral belongings. Another million were slaughtered. Around 75,000 to 1 lakh women were abducted and raped from their families that were torn apart. Sadat Hassan Manto, the sardonic witness of the genocide uh, that accompanied partisan rights, the partition of the country and the changes that followed left feelings of revolt in me. When I sat down to write, I found my thoughts scattered. Though I tried hard, I could not separate India from Pakistan and Pakistan from India. In my mind could not solve the question, what country did we belong to now, India or in Pakistan? Ample literary texts have been produced on the pernicious impact of partisan, but I have selected Tobatek Singh, where Manto dexterously explained with a pansa satirical tone the animosity of the unscrupulous political invaders. Manto here exposes that partisan not only produced a mad milieu but also made its victim mad and incel. People in both the newly born territories were in utter bewilderment about their citizenship, topographical and political identities, belongingness and unbelongingness. Throughout the number of following vignettes, Manto establishes that the inmates of the asylum are thinner than the so-called scrupulous politicians. Number one, the incessant raider of Jamindar, Maulvi Sahib, on being asked by where Pakistan is situated, retorted, a place in Hindustan where they make cutthroat razors. This is actually Manto's critique on partisan. Number two, another Sikh lunatic, on being inquired of Sardarji, why are we being sent to Hindustan? We don't know the language of the place, replied, I know the language of the Hindu staggers. Manto, ironically using the word Hindu staggers, railed at those Hindustanis who went strutting around like the devil on only to grasp the power. Number three, the murderers, pretending to be madmen, could not also realize anything regarding this arbitrary, dubious, and absurd partisan. Number four, a lunatic named Muhammad Ali was caught up so badly in the India-Pakistan and Pakistan-India rigmarole that leaving everything, he ascended the tree, and from that vantage point, he declared, I wish to live neither in India nor in Pakistan. I wish to live rather in trees. Even a tree, most strikingly enough, appears to be much more safer than the depraved India and Hindustan, Pakistan and Hindustan. Number five, a Muslim madman screaming Pakistan long live, who faints and became senseless, is a critic of the dubious and arbitrary partition or divisions. Number six, the communal conflict of the outer world reflected itself within the territory of Lahore Asylum, with a madman declaring himself to be Muhammad Ali Jinnah, while the other as Tara Singh. They who often lived together, shared same kind of beliefs and culture, got involved in an altercation and commenced to contaminate other communities, believing them to be their foes. Number seven, others, along with the protagonist Bishan Singh, who was searching for Tobatek Singh, had his village where he wanted to spend his remaining days, were in utter bewilderment and were unable to decide whether they were in Pakistan or in India. If they were in India, where on earth was Pakistan? If they were in Pakistan, then how came that until only the other day it was in India? The anxieties of the lunatics mirror the actual condition of the enormous sane people who were unaware about the vivisection. Manto argues how partisan, which is actually darkness under the lamp of independence, affects the psychosomatic territories of the inmates and how their behavioral patterns gradually affected or altered. The rituals and daily routine activities of most of the lunatics, of almost all the lunatics, have been severely affected due to this venomous poison, the arbitrary partisan. Almost the characters Almost all the characters in Lahore Asylum could not escape from the psychological trauma and the sense of identity crisis, whether they are in Pakistan or in India, was haunting them gradually. Not only the inmates, but also the people living outside the asylum are also in the same kind of bewilderment. Fazaldin, on being asked by the question, where is Toba taxing? He replied, in India, no, in Pakistan, meaning he is not also sure about the position of Toba taxing, whether it is in India or in Pakistan. At the border, when Bishan Singh discovered from the liaison officer that Tobatek Singh is in Pakistan, he refused to cross the barbed wire, and after much scuffle, he is left standing by himself in the no man's land. And finally, just before sunrise, Bishan Singh, the man who had stood on his legs for 15 years, scrambled and as the officers from the two sides rushed towards him, he collapsed to the ground. There, behind the barbed wire, on one side lay India, and behind more barbed wire, on other side lay Pakistan. In between, on a bit of earth which had no name, lay Tobatek Singh. This is how Manto provides the answers to the ever-hunting question that political power-seeking invaders may make the topographical alienation, but psychological alienation is never possible, is absolutely impossible. It also reveals the oscillating psychic dilemma regarding their vicissitudes of territorial or topographical belongingness or unbelongingness, eliciting the idea of the impact of rootlessness. Almost all the inmates of the asylum did not fail to almost all the inmates of the asylum did fail to understand the connotative meaning of the home, a place where one can find peace, solace, and feel secure. And they did not want the detachment from their friends, relatives, neighbors, kin and kith, their pets, and many more. They are psychologically obsessed with their native land. The protagonist Bishan Singh, who is vehemently searching for root, failed to discover the satisfactory answer, as everyone is in utter perplexity regarding the topographical changes. They not even understand why they are being uprooted from their place and thrown away like this. Intense desire for root and deep desire for belongingness is always there in their mind. Through this satirical text, Manto argues that this dawn is not the dawn we kept for. To conclude, to quote Mahatma Gandhi, leave India to God or leave India to anarchy. Thank you, sir.
Yes, thank you. Uh, Thank you for that wonderful presentation. Next, we have Mrs. Shukita, Department of English, Assistant Professor, Bharati Government College for Women, Puducherry.
Sir,
And the
may I
title,
off my camera?
yes, of course, please. The title of the paper is Stolen Generation and Overview.
Yeah, good af-
Yes,
yeah, good evening all.
good evening.
I am Sugita and the title of my paper is Stolen Generation and Overview. Um, yeah. So the stolen generation actually refers to the children of Australian.
Ma'am, if it is comfortable, can you please switch on the camera because for the recording purposes,
Um, yeah,
if it is,
just a minute, sir. Just a
if it
minute.
is.
Yeah. So yeah. So it refers to the children of Australian Aboriginal literature and Torres Strait Islanders, that's in Australia. So their children actually were removed forcibly from. This refers to the stolen generation. Uh, I will just before getting into the paper, I'll just tell you in gist what happened. In Australia, actually, the native Australians they lived there, and after the English people went there, they just captured the island, and they, as usual, like the colonialism started in Australia. And the children they were forcibly taken from the family. Most of the children they were forcibly taken from the family, native Australian family, and they were raised in raised in the sense given education, and they were actually what to say preached and taught by the British people only how to praise them, and how to look down upon their own nativity, and respect should be given to only the Australian, the English people, and the natives were degraded, and they were actually tortured by the English people. This paper is about that. And the children, when they were removed forcibly from the family by the Australian federal and state government agencies and church missions, these children were taken to the government institution. And these kids are known as stolen generation. Stolen in the sense they were taken, uh, abducted, stolen. Like these children, they were provided with a lower standard of education compared to the non-indigenous children. These stolen generation children were also taught to look down upon their indigenous heritage, their culture, tradition, language, and even their names were forcibly changed. So, indigenous literature becomes a powerful medium to express the sufferings of the Aboriginal people and their children. The indigenous writers seek the aid of autobiography to disclose their trauma and sufferings. So, I've taken Follow the Rabbit Proof Fence. It's actually an autobiography. So I have applied this thing along with the stolen generation. So the autobiographical writing of the stolen generation forms the fundamental connection between the sufferings and trauma of the individual with their writer self. So this autobiography aids the writer to expose the trauma of the stolen generation to its fullest. The Aboriginal people underwent a lot of trauma in the clutches of the white settlers, and this article tries to give a complete analysis of Doris Pilkington's Follow the Rabbit Proof Fence. Doris Pilkington, she is actually a native Australian, and she was also brought up in this government institution. And she too was like other half caste children removed from her mother to Moor River native settlement. So her mother Molly had escaped from the settlement and reached Jigalon by foot. Actually, this story is about her mother who escaped from the Australian that government institution. So she has written all the pains and sufferings her mother has undergone. So, in Follow the Rabbit Proof Fence, the Aboriginal people's life embedded into nature is clearly portrayed by Doris Pilkington. The Aborigines' life depended on nature entirely for their day to day life activities. They had no calendar or clock to run them. Even their dresses are mentioned, and diseases were mentioned and named in terms of seasons. For example, summer was mentioned as pink eye because the eye problems were brought only by the heat during, particularly during the summer time, and the winter is referred as the Yalta or Galu time. Even the days of the week denotes the domestic duties of the Aborigines. For example, Monday was named as Mending Day, and like so on. The White Raiders, it was going on like this. Till the white riders come to this island. The white riders they used to come in a ship or small boats and enslave the Aboriginal women for their pleasures. They even murdered the men who came to protect their women. So the women who were exploited by the white rider were used as slaves and were murdered when they were no longer needed, and they were thrown into the deep sea. And thus the English people enslaved the native Australians, and the tribe, the native people, when they they could not resist the captivation of the English people because they were so powerful with powerful weapons and everything. So they just succumbed to the English people and no other go. I'll come to uh, the everything. Even the clothes the natives wear, they were not of their choice. The English people will decide like what they have to wear, and otherwise they will call them and they will mock at them, they'll fun at them. And so instead of getting ridiculed, they prefer to wear the white clothes. The white settlers had instructed them to cover completely. And I quote Rupi, a native girl, says, they tell us we gotta cover everything. The Ujbula don't like to see half naked fellow. We never like to put clothes on first time, but we had no choice. So when it comes to clothes also, they insist everything. So the white settlers took with them several animals such as horses, cattle, sheep, foxes, and rabbits. Of them all, the rabbits got easily adapted to the Australian climate and they multiplied rapidly. And rabbits denotes deep meaning in Australian government also. So in order to control the population of the rabbits, the rabbit proof fence was built in 1907. The rabbit proof fence became an important landmark in the history of Australia. The natives also followed the rabbit proof fence. Jigalong, it's actually the place in Australia. Jigalong became a government depot in 1907 since it was the base for the maintenance men who worked in the sector of rabbit-proof fence. Many natives came and settled in Jigalong since the rations and clothing were distributed satisfactorily. The natives from other parts of the land began to settle in Jigalong to do the menial jobs given by the white settlers. Maud, a native girl, becomes pregnant by a white settler named Thomas Craig, inspector of the rabbit-proof fence, for a few years. So the custom of the natives was explained in a very interesting manner. When the baby was born, the natives rubbed the dry sand to remove the amniotic fluid from the baby's body. Then the grandmother would utter abusive words to protect the girl, like the baby, from the evils. And the first half-caste child of Jigalong was named Molly. But Molly often hated herself for being a half-caste child since the Madhu children made fun of her skin color. Like either they should be white or the native color. When there is a mixture of half white and half native, they are ridiculed and they are completely like what to say. Um, Discriminated and nobody like accepts that. Either the native also, they like see them as an alien person, and this English people also like not taking them along with them, so they are in between. Later, a lot of half mixed children were born. There was a common notion that part Aboriginal children were more intelligent than their darker relations and must be separated and trained to be a domestic servants and laborers. So the government has decided to set up two institutions for Aboriginal children with white fathers. One was set up at Kerala settlement and the other at Moore River native settlement. And this Molly's grandfather, out of anxiety that his grandchildren, which includes Daisy and Gracie, applied black charcoal into their bodies to make them like native people, and remained optimistic that the problem got solved since the color of the children were not revealed. But Constable Riggs, protector of Aborigines, came to take the three kids to the settlement. He ordered the girls to pack up everything without considering the emotions of the family and the children. These Aboriginal children, they were like half mixed children. They were the main target of the government because these kids, they are from the white fathers. So they just want to take them away from the native people because they think they are very intelligent than the native people. So they want them to be like English people. So they questioned the authorities, the mother and the father. They questioned about the authorities about this forceful act of taking the kid away with them, but no use. Molly thought not only she got cut off from her family, but also the entire landscape, culture, and language of a place. So the dormitory people instructed the three girls to learn English and forget their native language. I quote, "You girls can't talk blackfula language here, you know," came the warning from the other side of the dorm. "You gotta forget your language and talk English all the time." Molly decided to abscond from the place along with her cousin. They took some meager amount of food and decided to follow the rabbit-proof fence to reach Jigalong. Molly was very hopeful that nature would guide them to their very home. Molly, their actually a 14-year-old girl, had no fear because the wilderness was her kin. It always provided shelter, food, and sustenance for her. This proves the Aboriginal association with nature and how their life was embedded with nature in their day to day life. Molly, Gracie, and Daisy followed the rabbit proof fence with so many obstacles such as wild animals, police constables, and scarcity of food and water, but successfully reached Jigalong, although Gracie withdrew from the journey by half through. Molly had started the historical journey with the sole purpose to reach the journey, and she successfully did it. And a long way sums up rather understatedly what was without a doubt one of the longest walks in the history of the Australian outback. While other parts of this vast country of Australia have been crossed on horses or camels, these three girls did their exploring on their barefoot. An incredible achievement in anyone's language, the vastness and the diversity of the Western Australia landscape would always be respected and appreciated by them. They tracked across it and conquered by foot. You have to imagine 13 and 12 and 8-year-old girl has crossed like such a massive kilometers in Australia, and the rabbit proof fence plays a vital role in the novel, and it has several meanings to the book. In the beginning of the novel, the fence prevented the Aboriginal people of their hunting trades and their access to water resources. This forced the Aboriginal people to accept the government's policy of containment and move to the allotted settlement like Jigalong. The other notion of the fence brings out the Aboriginal people's ability to adopt, transcend, and connect with the geographical structure of the landscape. The Aboriginal people followed the rabbit proof fence in their enforced migration like any other natural geographical landscape they follow to reach their destination. When the Aboriginal people originated from desert to Jigalong, they followed the rabbit proof fence. This experience was shared by the elders to their younger ones. Thus, the next generation became aware of the rabbit proof fence. So, Doris Pilkington says that rabbit proof fence as it symbolizes love, home, and security. The culture and tradition of the Aboriginal people were completely destroyed by the white settlers in the course of time. And one can assume the three girls' journey to the homeland denotes a clash between the colonial racism, imperialism, and oppression of the Aboriginal people. And the author Pilkington tries to construct national and cultural identity of the Aboriginal people through Follow the Rabbit Proof Fence. To conclude, I opine that Rabbit Proof Fence indicate the Aboriginal people's sufferings and struggles for cultural existence. The Aborigines think that they do not fit into their colonialist culture and their disability to adhere the colonialist culture. The three girls' journey symbolizes that they return to their culture and consequently they combat the colonialist culture. Pilkington, through her books, certainly had contributed to the awareness of people about the issues and sufferings of the Aboriginal people of Australia. The freedom which was desired by the three girls symbolizes the freedom desired by the entire Aboriginal people from the clutches of the white settlers. The trauma of the Aboriginal people to unlearn their culture, language, and tradition make them detest and abhor the white settlers and their educational system. The success of the Follow the Rabbit Proof Fence is a small step to make the Aboriginal people to feel proud of their Aboriginal roots and in their Aboriginal against the white settlers' culture. To conclude, one can say that this life writing relieved many Australians from their guilt of their forefathers' cruel attitude to the Aboriginal people. Pilkington has taken a very sensitive and significant issue of the life of the stolen generation and did her best to disclose the emotions and trauma of the Aboriginal people. Thank you.
Thank you. Yes, thank you, Mrs. Sukita. Uh, this is the last and the final call for Ekta Bawa, who has to present a paper on an ecological sailing towards Amitav Ghosh's Ibis Trilogy, a historical perspective. Do we have Ekta Bawa here among us for the presentation? Right. So, with that, I would conclude. Probably this session is going to be concluded here, and it was a wonderful session. We had a lot of papers, interesting papers. We started with Anwar Hossain's quest for homeland in Rabindranath Tagore's Gora. His paper talked about the quest for homeland, where an individual choice is respected. Okay, due to unavoidable circumstances, Ekta is unable to join. Okay, okay. Um, right. So probably they would, Ekta would get in touch with the organizers and try and figure out if she can, please connect presenter. Please contact presenter, maybe some problem. Okay, 1 second. Uh, Ekta, since she has not presented, she can get in touch with the organizers and they will definitely figure out a way. Okay, so till then, we will go ahead. So, like I said, the paper was, we started the presentation with Anwar Hossain's Quest for Homeland in Rabindranath Tagore's Gora. His paper was on the quest of homeland, where an individual choice is respected as delineated by tracing the main protagonist Gora's encounter with his change in worldview while he was interacting with multiple characters and his experiences. Then we had Durdana, Jahan and Dr. Shaifali Arora's rereading Dimple as a typecasted trans woman character in Jeet Thayil's Narcopolis, where she talks about in this particular novel how the novelist fails to give any scope for development for the trans character, and how the trans character, the trans woman, is typecasted in a typical stereotypical image and not being provided any scope for development. Then we had Shonak Das's presentation on departure excuse me, departure from subjectivity, figurations in Proust and Moschel. Okay, so this paper, through his paper, Shonak traces the shift in architectonics of the modernist novel, focusing on Proust in specific. In his paper, he showed us homeliness and alienation. He projected homeliness and alienation not as themes, but as narratives, as embodiments of loss of subjectivity as a reliable, inhabitable shelter for existence. Then we had Muhammad Naimuddin Molla's metaphor of insanity, Manto's Toba Tek Singh. And in this paper, Naimuddin tried to investigate the important question, the most pertinent question in all partition literature, that is, can the psyche be partitioned? Can the psyche be partitioned? The investigation, reveals the dangling psychic dilemma regarding the vicissitude of territorial and topographical belongingness or unbelongingness, to be in specific, emphasizing the idea of the impact of rootlessness. Then, in the end, we had Mrs. Shokita's The Golden Generation, an overview in which she talks about Doris Pilkington's Follow the Rabbit Proof Fence, and she tried to touch upon the most sensitive, history of the notorious history of Australian, Aboriginals, how the children were separated from their parents in the garb of giving culture and education, how the, kind of unidentity of a particular character was given, and trying to show that we are going to give you education, we are going to give you culture, and through the garb of this so-called modernization, children were separated and subhuman beings were created. In fact, now we have also this trend in which we have writers of the Aboriginals and even writers from the Mexico and all trying to showcase their own culture in it. Right. So this brings us to the end of the session. If we have, as it is, we are running a lot of, we are running late in time, but since the papers were very nicely presented and an in-depth, kind of research was done, I found it inappropriate to stop you in between. So do we have any questions for the session? We can take 1 or 2 maximum, or else we will conclude here. Any observation, any questions? Right. Okay. So we would conclude the session here. The next session would be starting in a few minutes, probably in a minute or two at 6 o'clock. So over to the organizers.
Yes, so I'd request Bapin Moldi to give a short vote of thanks. Bapin, over to you.
Am I audible?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. You're audible, sir.
Am I audible, Hassan?
Yes, sir.
Yes,
Yes,
sir.
yes.
Yes, sir. Very much. Yes,
Okay,
sir.
Yes,
okay.
absolutely.
Thank you so much. So on behalf of the organizing committee of this conference, I'd like to thank the chairperson, today's chairperson, Dr. Shoaib Aziz sir. And I'd like to thank all the presenters and of course at the same time who have participated this conference. So I'd like to hand over this virtual space to Hassan Dabuk for conducting the next session. Over to you.
Okay, thank you very much, Bapin. So